And we're going to have to see more of those kinds of public-private partnerships that marry the two, because as our utilities, there's going to be a 21% increase, projected 21% increase in electricity demand in this country by 2030. To meet that demand, we're going to have to bring on new energy sources. Our current energy system is just not going to be able to meet it, and that's not even talking about the infrastructure needs of that system, which are enormous as well as the water system. And as each utility starts to face this, one of the questions they're getting more and more is water usage. The concerns being raised are the interrelationship between energy, extraction of energy, how do you produce energy, and the water usage that goes along with it. So I haven't seen many examples yet of it, but I hear more and more of the question being raised as the utilities go forward to look for the new energy sources that they're going to bring online. And it's like looking at the full carbon footprint. When you talk about a carbon footprint of something, you rarely look at the beginning and the end. They're starting now more and more, and companies are being required to look at the entire carbon footprint, meaning how do you get your material from one place to another? How is it made? Not just the end product or not just your little part of it, but everything that goes into that process. They're going to start to have to look at water as being part of that as well, and looking at the whole scope of energy production as it relates to water. I hope that answered your question.
I believe Madam Governor impressively covered the answer to this question, so just for the sake of time, I think we may not add anything further than that. So we go to the next person who would like to have distinguished delegate. I think that I should ask Dr. Mike Magee, but Dr. Magee, please kindly introduce yourself for the record. We all know you, please.
Yeah, I'm Mike Magee with healthywaters.org, and we focus on getting health professionals more involved in the water issue. And the question I had, Governor, is, as you know, we've been very focused on the American diet of late, mainly because of the chronic disease burden that's associated with the diet that we have and with the problem with childhood obesity. But a related issue has to do with the fact that the American diet is an enormous water consumer, that it takes about 3,000 liters of water in order to support the daily American diet for an average American. So the question I had was whether your Policy Institute is looking at all at this issue of possible water conservation gains that might come with moving the American diet toward less processed food and less meat and more grain.
No, in a word, we're not. We haven't, but it is something we will, now that you have brought it up. I have to confess to you, at this point, we have not identified that as being one of the areas of focus, but I will make sure that we do.
Thank you. Next, distinguished delegates at the very end would like to ask a question. Please kindly introduce yourself.
Yes, Paul Mankiewicz. I run the Gaia Institute in New York City, although I was born in the beautiful state of New Jersey. I love your idea of source control, and that's really spectacular. The problem is the potential capital intensiveness and the time frame of getting that in place is not necessarily an easy way to stabilize political economies where there is trouble and there are essentially volatile elements. I'm wondering if you're looking at any, or you know of people who are looking at any way to look at individual household or community scale water supply that can be coupled with, in the longer term, the better goal of source control and getting a watershed that actually supports larger communities.
I'm trying to think of how the best way to answer that is. In a short answer, yes, we're looking at those sorts of things, but the biggest issue that we have and that I have seen both at EPA and subsequently is educating the individual. We have, as I think we probably all, the Americans here will remember, that the Exxon Valdez spill was the worst single environmental disaster that we've had in this country. And yet every 8 months, as much oil is deposited along the coastline United States from non-point source pollution as was released during that spill. That's from people, you know, not fixing a leaky oil pan or changing the oil in their car in their driveway and letting it run under the pavement because they say, I don't live near a stream. What difference is it going to make to me? So educating the public and doing it on a community by community basis to say we live in a watershed, most people look at you and say, what's a watershed? They have no idea. And you try to tell them everybody lives in a watershed. It's like a drainage area. We're all in a drainage area somewhere. One of the things we did while I was at EPA, and I don't know what's happened to it subsequently, is we did a study, and it showed that Americans, at least, are most focused on learning when they're watching the news during the weather, because that's when you've got those neat maps showing, you know, you've got a high here and a low here, and you're going to freeze for the next month, and then you're going to boil and all that kind of neat stuff, and people are paying attention then. So we went to the Meteorological Association, and they said, would you do a pilot program where you would educate your meteorologists to say, when they're doing the weather and saying there's going to be a big rainstorm, you know, that we're going to have a nor'easter here in New York, New Jersey next week. So it's not a good idea to go out and fertilize your lawn, because if you do, it's only going to get washed away. And you, oh, by the way, live in this watershed. Here is where your water is going to go. Here is where it is going to end up. This is why we had dead zones. It's going to be that kind of thing that's going to enable us eventually to get to the communities, to educate people so that they understand that this is something that on a community by community basis, nature doesn't observe geopolitical boundaries. That's the challenge that we have here. Water companies and utilities tend to be localized, and they serve a particular community, and it's very hard to get people to plan across municipal boundaries and governmental boundaries, and yet that's where the issues are not relegated to a single community. And so it's going to take a much broader approach, as well as being a little more, well, I hate the term because it's so overused, outside the box thinking, some more creative thinking to try to get people, and it's true everywhere, try to get people to really understand the issue and challenges around water and how everything that they do actually has a cumulative impact. That they, in and of themselves, if they fix the leaky water faucet in their bathroom, it may not save them a whole lot of water. But if everybody in their neighborhood did it, you'd be saving hundreds of gallons, and that would make a real difference over time. So people are becoming more aware of it, and that people who study the issue. I'm not sure I'd say that the public in general is, and that's going to take a lot more education.
Yes, sir.
This country has an aversion to planning, long-range planning, always has. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about implementation of a national water policy?
But can you also kindly introduce yourself for the record, please?
Dry project.
Governor, please.
I think the possibilities of having a national water policy enacted anytime in the near future are slim to none. I say that because if you look at the problems we have now in enforcing the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act, the pushback that we're getting on some of those areas, the idea of trying to take the next step and having a national water policy will just be enormous. And frankly, it's interesting because this is one buzzsaw that I ran into my first 2 weeks at EPA was dealing with the leftover regulations that had been put through at the end of the Clinton administration, one of which had to do with arsenic in drinking water, reducing it from 90 parts per billion, or 50 parts per billion then down to 10, something I'd done in the state of New Jersey already, and I didn't have a problem with it. But we didn't have naturally occurring arsenic